It has to do with the idea of vibrational frequency
Yes.
and things happening that aren't preferred.
Oh, all right.
And the idea being that, here in Las Vegas, there was a significant incident,
Yes.
if you would call it that.
Yes. You're referring to the shootings.
Yes.
All right.
And the idea that so many people were in this very high vibrational state, excited by the music and everything, and something like that could happen at the same time. And
of course,
often when you're describing the idea of whatever your frequency is determines what is possible to happen to you.
Correct.
How does that all work?
Well, first of all, again, you have to take it on a person-by-person basis. And there are many reasons that can go along with this experience. Number one, those that were in a high vibrational state in a certain way were not harmed. Do you understand?
Yes.
Number two, those that were in a high vibrational state and were either harmed or killed may have chosen to go out on a high note. Do you understand?
Yes.
People will choose to, as the roulette wheel spins, if it is their timing to transition into spirit, they may choose certain things that are representative of an opportunity, what you would call a random event they will gear themselves towards. They will attract themselves towards because it might be the easiest way for them to transition when they are, in fact, having the most fun. Now, yes, of course, there are going to be other people in the crowd that will have attracted it for different reasons, some of which may be fear-based, some of which may be negative, belief system-based. But again, you're going to have to interview every single person to understand what their particular state was at the time that that particular incident happened. At the same time, remember, your Earth is splitting into different parallel realities very physically now. So you're going to see both positive and negative things very entwined, side by side, overlapping. There are glass walls for some, there are not glass walls for others who are willing to participate in a reality they may not ultimately prefer, yet they will use it somehow to their benefit ultimately. But again, this is a very, very complex situation with a lot of different overlapping belief systems and different people being there for different reasons that are personal to them, personal to their belief systems, and you would have to interview them all to get a really truly accurate picture of all the different things that were going on that allowed people to experience that particular incident in the way that they did.
Are we in that sense like more brave in spirit that we would be willing to be in a situation like that? Whereas as a
yes, in
human,
a sense, I suppose you could put it that way, because remember that from the spirit point of view, this is nothing but a dream.
Yeah.
It doesn't discount it, it doesn't invalidate it. But from the spirit point of view, it's no more solid than you having a dream of something happening and then waking up to find that, oh, your life is going on as normal. You learn something from it, perhaps. You reflect on it, perhaps. But it's not as substantial to you as your physical life. From spirit, physical reality is not as substantial as your spirit being. Therefore, it can be used in a variety of ways in a very dreamlike fashion to have a number of different kinds of experiences that can add to the soul's understanding of itself, its growth, its experience within creation, but it doesn't have the same perspective of it in the way that you do from within the dream. It's a temporary event that can happen for very particular personal purposes, a variety of reasons, and it will always be used by spirit in a way that allows the spirit to expand, ultimately.
So that relationship between the spirit level and the person that's here on Earth.
Yes.
The person here on Earth might perceive spirit as being cavalier about the life.
They might assign that kind of an idea to it, but it's not meant to be taken that way.
Right.
It's not, again, meant to invalidate the physical reality, nor is it in any way, shape, or form meant to condone the actions of someone who chooses to fall into their negative belief system and fear-based belief system to the point where they feel like they have to go out and kill people or injure them or harm them in any way. It's not condoning the behavior. It's simply saying from another level, This is a play that plays out in a different way from a different perspective as far as spirit is concerned. Because to spirit, it's not exactly real.
So the balanced way to relate to our higher mind and to spirit in that sense, that is trusting and grounded, would be, how would you express that? The way we should look at
Your hair, I know this is a strange analogy, your hair is dead follicles. You cut it off. Do you care about your hair that you cut off?
that. Are you asking me?
Well, in other words, again, I'm not saying you can't care, meaning that you have to be callous about it. But the idea is that in some senses, please don't take this negatively, in some senses, because spirit knows you never die, ever, it's sort of similar to the idea of getting your hair cut. You really almost don't give it a second thought for the hair that's on the floor.
I get that. It takes me into the idea of people who have experiences in childhood that don't allow them to trust the higher levels of themselves.
Yes, but
that
that's
feel
part of
lost.
their journey that they chose
Exactly.
to challenge themselves with.
So the idea would be that how do you have a trusting relationship with that level of yourself if you don't believe that it's going to preserve your physical existence?
You learn as best you can to understand how reality works, and then you start applying that knowledge, and it can allow things to change. But again, remember, it's not like someone has to do that, because again, you're eternal and infinite. What lessons are not learned in a life will be learned somewhere else. The experience itself, unchanging, can also be of value.
Well, and the idea of if you have a cooperative relationship with your higher mind and with the
Yes.
spirit levels of yourself,
Yes.
you're always going to be choosing the states of being that let go of negative thoughts and ideas, because
Generally,
that
yes.
will, in general, move you in the direction that is correct for you.
Yes, but again, all we're saying is even if you don't develop that relationship, if you're never taught how to, and you live your entire life that way, full of negative and fear-based belief systems, and you die that way, it's still something the spirit can learn from and move on from. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted.
It seems like part of our journey here is to trust those levels of ourselves, to understand how it relates to our life, and then at the same time choose those states of being that allow you to experience the most ecstasy, in a sense, on this planet. That will be the best route to
Most of you are here to learn that you have that choice. Yes. That's what the transformational age is about. That's the theme, to learn you have the freedom to choose what you prefer instead of what you don't.
Right, and that's the responsibility of us.
Yes.
To the thoughts that we work with as a physical being, these are the things that are there for us to transform and
Yes.
work with, so that we are in harmony with the higher levels of ourselves, and we
Yes.
have the best experience that way.
Yes, responsibility in terms of your ability to respond.
There were some questions about Essassani. Do you have a formal education system in your world?
There are some forms of that. We've already described that I went through a kind of formal training to become a first contact specialist. So it just depends. In general, no. Because, again, as we have said, a child of 3 years is allowed to simply wander off and learn whatever it is they need to learn, because they are always telepathically connected to everyone. Everyone acts as the parent and the guardian of the children, and therefore they can generally learn what they need to learn. Now, what we have described to you sometimes as systems that might work on your own planet to some degree has relevance for our world and our society as well, in terms of creating safe spaces so children can learn the consequences of their choices in a safe way, creating the idea of understanding self-empowerment, creating the idea of adapting lessons that are necessary to their excitement instead of the other way around. These are all general principles in our society that the children are exposed to. So you could say that is a kind of a system, but it is always based on synchronism, trusting that everyone is going to be exactly where they need to be, interacting with exactly whom they need to interact with, exactly when they need to interact with them, learning exactly what they need to learn, exactly when they need to learn it. We operate on pure synchronism. So yes, there is a balance of both. Formal training, which still uses those principles, depending on what you're being trained to do, and a generalized form for the collective society to learn whatever it is they need to learn by being guided by synchronicity into the circumstances and situations that may require more formal training or not.
So if you were to take a stroll through the forest in your reality,
Yes.
what kinds of plants and animals might you see?
Well, we've described some of them. There is the vikwa, which is the idea, I suppose, in your understanding of something that would pass for a hairless white gibbon, but it's not. It is the precursor form of what we became. It is the template form that still lives in our forests of what we were crafted from as a physical society. So we get to interact with our precursor. Does that make sense to you? There are many different kinds of animals. We have described the Assisa in our oceans, kind of like a black and white striped whale that gives birth from the black parts of the stripes by sending up bubbles to the surface that then hatch, that become new Assisas. And of course, we have said all of the life on our planet is symbiotic, not predatory. The jungles are full of all sorts of interesting life forms and flowers and plants of different kinds, one of which we have described that you would say might be called the stained glass flowers that climb up the trees and expose themselves to the sun, casting beautiful colored rainbows on the forest floor. There are many different forms of life. Will this answer the question, or do you want something different?
Yes, I was wondering if any of the animals ever choose to be companions or pets or familiars for the beings on your
Yes,
planet.
animals will hang around from time to time, but we don't necessarily keep them as pets in the same way that you do. They will come and go, but sometimes they can form bonds and long relationships with many of us. So they become companions in that sense, yes.
Do you have any cat-like beings?
We do. It's not exactly a cat. It's longer, slenderer, narrower, I suppose you would say. But I suppose it's the closest thing to a cat. It's an ebe. What's so funny about that?
Well, I was just thinking how much I like cats, and how much you guys would be missing if you didn't have any, so.
We would be missing nothing. But we are certainly appreciative and grateful that they exist in our society. Ebes are very, very good companions for a lot of reasons. The fact that you use the word familiar is actually quite close, because the idea is that the ebe has special properties. Some of those special properties have to do with, how do we put this in your language? Imagine if you had a cat, just to use your analogy, that could walk up to you, gaze into your eyes, and suddenly allow you to see multiple parallel realities laid out like a deck of cards. I suppose that would be the closest analogy to what an ebe can do with us. They are almost like physicalized forms of parallel probable reality choices that we get to meditate on, if you wish to use that word. When an ebe presents those parallel probabilities to you, We know that synchronicity is at a very high level and acting as a crossroads. So the Ebes are like crossroad animals for us, acting like road markers for when we are at a crossroads about to choose different parallel paths. They can help guide us by presenting those paths to us in a very realistic, three-dimensional way that we can then explore with them momentarily, actually walking down those paths, you would say virtually, as we allow ourselves to feel which one we align the most with. This is an extended form of synchronicity. When an Ebe shows up, you know you're at a crossroads, and it's a very exciting thing. Yes?
Yes. When you were saying that, it kind of reminded me of the idea of gazing into certain crystal skulls, that
Can be.
the same kind of thing on our level can be presented to you.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Sort of. Yes, it can. Now, we want to point out one more thing.
Okay.
Remember that our society is hybridized, our language is hybridized based on some earth languages, other planetary languages. It's a cross combination of many different things. It's not an accident that an Ebe was named an Ebe, because backwards it is a bee, a busy bee in a lot of different ways that collects a type of pollen and presents it in its most delicious form as honey for your thoughts. So it's not an accident that the name is a backwards bee.
It's really fascinating. I was just thinking how you also get to experience my cat Sedona
Yes.
as a kind of familiar for you.
Yes. And by the way, Ebes also live in hives.
So you have Ebe hives.
Yes. Ebes are only about this big. They almost never get bigger.
So the hives would be how many in a hive?
Thousands.
Ooh.
They are made of leaves. The hives. Not the Ebes. They gather leaves and use a kind of secretion from their mouths to paste them together into large, complex, twisting hives, whole communities. There can be entire sections of certain forests that are an Ebe community, an Ebe hive.
Fascinating.
Yes, it is. So then,
This had to do with, maybe there's two more. One is, what are the signs that you are in or around a vortex?
oh, they can be many. The idea is that some people are sensitive to the electromagnetic fields of them and might feel a little bit of a tingling sensation on their skin. Others might suddenly feel that they are all of a sudden in touch with their deepest emotions and don't know why, because a vortex will usually magnify and amplify what you bring in with it, positive or negative. So suddenly you might just feel overwhelmed by some emotional idea. That can mean you're standing square in a vortex. There can be many different kinds of symptomologies.
Yeah, mainly it's just that amplification of your energy that makes you feel more in touch with
Not
whatever.
always. Sometimes it can just make you really, really dizzy, disoriented, because you're disorienting from one reality and reorienting to a multitude of parallel probable realities that the vortex might be connected to. There are many different kinds of symptoms.
I know on the Hawaiian island, with Pele and the volcano and everything,
Yes.
that kind of energy seems to be very amplifying
Yes.
for people.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So this last question is, the person is having an issue with living their passion and moving on in their life because of a regretful memory of a past mistake and a very painful period of time in their life.
Yes.
And every time they try to follow their passion, they start feeling bad and holding back from living in their highest potential because of that memory.
Then that means they're not using the mistake to learn something from. They're not validating it as an opportunity to learn a lesson that will move them forward. They are invalidating the experience as if it didn't belong, when obviously if it happened, they could learn something from it and allow it to belong in their lives. They're rejecting a portion of themselves by not validating it for the lesson it could teach them. Once they validate it and learn the lesson, they will be free to move on. They will stop rejecting that portion of their lives as if it didn't belong.
I've noticed that part of the journey seems to be about getting to a place where you can let go of thoughts that are bringing you down in a sense, or
Well, let go of the beliefs that generate the thoughts, yes.
that's ultimately what is involved. You
Yes.
let go of the beliefs that are,
The thoughts go with it. The feelings go with it. The behavior goes with it. The experience goes with it. That's what we mean when we say the belief is the blueprint of all of it.
so when someone says, well, I can't seem to stop because I'm ruminating, I'm constantly.
Go back to the motivational mechanism. They don't choose to do what they do unless they believe it somehow benefits them. They need to find the belief that makes it seem as if it benefits them when they know it doesn't.
So, and regret is really about thinking that you did something wrong and that you can't fix it, or that the hopelessness
It's
kind of
going
thing.
back to the concept of lack of worthiness, of invalidating the self, thinking you're supposed to be so perfect you can never make a mistake. Mistakes are how you learn, so they're not really mistakes. You have a saying on your planet that is actually very wise. Good judgment comes from making mistakes. Making mistakes comes from bad judgment. So bad judgment leads to mistakes, which lead to good judgment. That's the process.
So it's just reframing a lot of these ideas that we have that keep people in negative cycles in their brain that they're
Yes.
trying to stop, and they don't know
Reframing
how.
is the key. That's why we say you need to understand the definitions you're applying to things and choose different definitions. Choosing different definitions is just as real as any definition that's already been there, and that's the same thing as reframing. You reframe your reality from a new perspective, from a new definition, and then you'll experience it differently. You are free to do this.
So I've noticed that there are individuals in their 20s, let's say, that they feel so strongly the things that happened to them in their childhood.
I understand, but you have to understand and remember that many humans are coming from not having been given the tools to
Right.
understand what's happening to them when they go through those changes. Therefore, they have to attract in their lives the circumstances that will give them the tools, the understanding, so they can deal with those things in an easier way.
Is it also, though, part of our growth process? I mean, in terms of aging, like when you're in
Yes.
your 20s, you're processing a lot of stuff from your childhood and your teens. And then when you're 30s, you start recognizing that, hey, I'm the only one that really, you're not trying to
Yes.
please
Yes,
so much.
in general, but that's just what's become your human pattern. It's not inevitable. It's not a given that it has to happen that way. It's not human nature. It's human learning
Okay.
that creates that pattern.
So we can accelerate this for younger
Absolutely.
people. by
Do you not yourself already recognize that much younger people in this day and age seem extremely mature?
They definitely seem like they can do things that we couldn't do.
That's an indication that it can be accelerated regardless of the age.
So that's actually lovely, because that means that all that we've gone through in prior generations has allowed each generation to accelerate in certain ways. And we're
Yes.
seeing the benefits of that in the
That
children.
is the gift you give to future generations. They don't have to go through the same thing.
It's lovely.